Welcome to OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript, with your hosts, Matteo Collina and James Snell. In today's episode, we are talking to Ramón Guijarro, a product-focused engineer with extensive experience in JavaScript and React, who is passionate about building great user interfaces and a better web for us all.
There's this push from Google for adding more and more web APIs to close the gap with native applications. And on the one hand, that's great, and that pushes the web forward. But on the other hand, it makes it even more difficult for other browser vendors to keep up. We need to think about the balance between moving forward and actually being able to have more than one browser vendor.
Ramón talks to us about the importance of the developer experience, his approach to trying out different programs, how to know which APIs to use when there are so many, and much more.
I would say have an ear out for what's new, and you don't really need to dive deep into everything because, let's be realistic, that's impossible. But it's nice to know what's out there and have a broad idea or about what you can do with it. And then if you ever feel the need, that thing exists.
Let's get into it. This is OpenHive.JS from NearForm. Welcome to OpenHive.JS, our podcast on all things JavaScript with NearForm guests. I am Matteo Collina, and I'm joined today by my colleague James Snell and our guest, Ramón Guijarro, for a chat about modern web APIs, JavaScript command lines tools, and more. Welcome, Ramón. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. So I'm a web engineer from Madrid, Spain. I currently work at a small startup here called Undefined Labs. We will build developer tools around testing and observability. And so I work mainly with JavaScript and React. I really like them. But above all, I like the web in general as a platform. It's promise of an open medium that is accessible to all, the development community around it. I think that's all great. And I'm also an occasional tech speaker. Last year I gave different talks at 6 conferences around the world. And in general, I like moving fast and learning new things, tech related or not.
Thank you, Ramón. Yeah, we are here to talk about all the new stuff, new features of JavaScript, and a lot of other things. So
yeah, in terms of some of the web APIs and stuff that you use, Ramón, where do you end up finding that you're spending most of your time in terms of those new APIs? With service workers, payment requests, which things do you end up using the most?
That's an interesting question because there's a lot of excitement for a lot of these new web APIs, but the truth is, I wouldn't say that some of them are not useful. They are, but maybe not so applicable to our day-to-day jobs, right? Like, I don't know, web Bluetooth, for example. You might have a use case for that in your company, but it's not as common. However, things like service workers are definitely very common and something that everybody's using now. When I started giving talks about this a few years ago, people were still surprised about them, but they're more common nowadays. So I'd say service workers, the notifications API that is tied to that, it's also very big. And I would say those are the two modern web APIs that are most used. Also the geolocation API, I don't know if we can consider that modern because it's kind of old really, but it ties into this group of APIs that close the gap between what native mobile apps can do and what the web can do. So I like to talk about them all together, even though some of them are way older than others, because I think there's a joint story for all of them.
Right. You mentioning there that some of these are more useful than others. It does raise a very important point. Is there are so many of these APIs that are out there that browsers are supporting. How do developers rationalize about which ones they should use, which ones they need to be paying attention to, right? I mean, there's so much there. How do they pick and choose which are the more important ones?
Yeah, I think first of all, one thing that I hear a lot is about browser support. Like, I cannot use this API because it's not supported in, I don't know, IE 11 or something like that.
Right, yeah.
Which is something that it's a browser that a lot of people need to support. But the thing here is about progressive enhancement. The point is providing the users with the best possible experience for their device or their browser. So one example that comes to mind is the payment request API. This is an API that basically allows you to leverage native UI in the browser to ask for payment details to the user. And it also works with autocomplete in the browser. So if the user entered their credit card before, you can basically have them pay for something in your web application with one tap. And that's very powerful, not only in terms of like conversion and all these business things, but also in terms of experience. Like the experience is really nice. But of course, you still need to have a traditional payment flow, like custom made for users that don't have access to those APIs. So in the end, you cannot really drop the old things. It's just progressive enhancement, basically. You need to detect these features and use them when you can. And yeah, it's hard to to know what things to pay attention. I would say have an ear out for what's new, and you don't really need to dive deep into everything because let's be realistic, that's impossible. But it's nice to know what's out there and have a broad idea of about what you can do with it. And then if you ever feel the need, well, that thing exists. Now is the time to deep dive on it, to implement it. So yeah, that's kind of my approach. Like I like to hear about what's going on, but I'm not gonna dive deep into it right now if I'm not gonna use it because it doesn't make that much sense.
Your point about web Bluetooth. I mean, we've had direct use cases for that with the devices, the conference devices we've put out for NodeConf.eu for the past 3 years. But I've never really encountered another use for it outside of the Esperino devices. So
yeah,
I've done so much Bluetooth when I was doing my PhD that I am literally like running away from it. I don't know about you, but I love Bluetooth. I have all my peripheral as Bluetooth. Is a fantastic standard, especially BLE and so on. But if you look, once upon a time, I had the idea of, well, how is the Bluetooth spec? Like, what is the Bluetooth spec? Okay, how does this work? And I opened the book. Well, there was a book at the time. It was a long time. And there was the book. And the book was like three finger. There was 3 fingers of a book for this pen. And I just thought, what? And my tutor said, well, the way we typically control dongles is that we intercept what the commands that other devices are sending to them and just replace them.
Yeah.
That was how you program Bluetooth devices. Sorry, I'm joking, but that was actually like
yeah, but only half joking, right? Because I actually have a sort of funny anecdote about that. My first talk I ever gave was about this topic, modern web APIs, and I wanted to do a demo for Bluetooth. It was under some flag in Chrome Canary or something at that point. And so I basically wanted to connect to a Bluetooth light bulb and make it turn it on and off when I was shaking my device. So it was nice because I was playing with 2 different APIs at the same time. It was like very spectacular for people to see. And basically what I did in order to make the Bluetooth light bulb work was basically that. Like I looked on, I researched online and I saw that someone had basically reverse engineered the codes for a specific Bluetooth light bulb in order to do those things, because like every device does pretty much what it wants inside the very generic spec. So I just basically bought that that same light bulb, so I didn't have to do it myself. But it was pretty much that how people were making it work, just reverse engineering it.
Yeah, that whole process of just kind of picking it apart, seeing how it works. I think that's probably how quite a few of us actually just learned how to write code. Period.
So, yeah, definitely
it works. You mentioned, kind of the older APIs, and this is something that actually can be quite daunting. Is how do you deal with legacy, different capabilities and across the browsers, and even older APIs. So if you look at fetch versus XML HTTP request, right?
Yeah.
These are used to different extents. They're supported to different extents. Even among different dependencies, right? That are using different ones. What kind of strategies have you developed for you in terms of dealing with that kind of legacy?
Yeah, it's complicated, in particular with some of those. For example, like you mentioned, like the fetch API versus the old XML HTTP request, because it's so core to your application. Like that's basically what a web application is making requests to some server and like rendering the data that you get. It depends on a lot of factors, like the maturity of your product. If you're just, for example, in my case, I've mostly worked at startups. So if you're just starting and you're still in this proof of concept point, or like having your first customers and whatnot, you can get away with just using fetch, for example, and maybe adding a polyfill for that, or even not doing that, because maybe in my current company, for example, we know that our users are developers, all of them, because it's a developer tools product. So we can get away with a lot because we know that they're not going to be using Internet Explorer 11 or something, to access that. If you need to support those APIs, polyfills are a way to do it. You are most likely using some kind of bundler like Webpack. That not only bundles but takes care of a lot of things. So in Webpack, in combination with Babel, allows you to do things like that, like add support, add polyfills for browsers that don't have support for that. And then you have, which is probably the most complicated case, you have APIs that change. And we've seen that with a few of them, that they were callback based because they're sort of old, and then they transition to a promise based version, and now you have modern browsers using the promise way of things, and then the old browsers are still using callbacks. So you need to see what you need to support and basically act accordingly. For in my previous company, for example, which was bigger and it was a product for the general public, I worked at Telefónica, which is a phone company in Spain. We had a polyfill for fetch that was custom made because we didn't really need much things. We were only using because at the end of the day, like XML HTTP requests, you can do a lot of things with it. So we just need a subset. So we basically wrote a fetch function for ourselves that used XML HTTP request internally. So we would get the nice API from fetch, but with support for every browser under the sun, basically.
I have one quick question. You mentioned Internet Explorer.
Uh-huh.
Now, you know that is going out of end of life later this year.
Mm-hmm.
What are your feelings?
I'm very lucky in that right now I don't have to support Internet Explorer that much because again, it's a very early phase startup, so we might have to do some fixes if an early client is using it, but that's extremely unlikely, to be honest. So I'm not super affected by it, but in general, I think it's great that it's finally going away. Although that just reminded me that there's like the reverse side of it. One thing that I'm not so happy about is Edge, the new Edge using the Chrome engine, basically. And that has a lot to do with web APIs as well. It kind of ties everything together, because there's this push from Google for adding more and more web APIs to, as I mentioned before, close the gap with native applications. And on the one hand, that's great, and that pushes the web forward. But on the other hand, it makes it even more difficult for other browser vendors to keep up, and that's the truth of it. So I think we need to think about the balance between moving forward and actually being able to have more than one browser vendor, because it's getting harder and harder. Basically, Mozilla is the only one almost keeping up with it, and they're always, even in that case, they're always a little bit behind in APIs, because like Google has a lot of people working on their browser. So that's something that I think about from time to time. Like, we get super excited about these new things, but on the other hand, it's really making browser vendors' lives harder, and we do need more browser vendors, because we don't want to go back to Internet Explorer times. So.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's really not even just the browser vendors, right? We get pressure in Node on the server side to start adopting more of these web platform APIs as they become available on the client side, right? And thankfully, I think there's not a great many of them that are relevant. For Node. We could just say, okay, no. But there is quite a bit that happens there in that browser side, that simply because it's available there now to developers, those developers look at Node and say, okay, well, why isn't it here also? And it makes it tough. It's hard to maintain a small core philosophy.
Yeah.
if the core on the other side just keeps right on growing.
I just wanted to go back to one thing you mentioned briefly, which was service workers. What are you using service workers for?
Performance, to begin with. Like, I mean, there are many things to them. Like, there are entire courses on service workers out there. But one of the nice things about them is the whole caching thing. The fact that it's basically a network proxy. So every time you request some asset from your server, you can cache it locally. And the benefit for the good thing about that is that the next time your users visits your website, depending on how you configure the cache, but you can get to a point in which they don't actually need to download anything. Like, the first render is super fast because they're getting all the assets, like the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript. They're getting all that from their browser cache. So yeah, there's going to be a network request for getting new data. But even in that case, you can still use, I was going to say, local storage. That doesn't scale that well for bigger applications, but IndexedDB, whatever it is, storage technology in the browser to store the user data as well. So you can actually boot up your full web app with user data from the cache without making a single network request. And that's great for performance. Like, the users are going to see that immediately. And of course, that opens the door for offline use, which is another big thing service workers provide. And one of the, I would say, the biggest gap between web applications and mobile native apps, the fact that before service workers, if you open a website without connection, well, you get a blank page, or like the dinosaur in Chrome or whatever. There's really, because there's no network, so you cannot ask for the assets. But with service workers, again, you can load all that from the browser cache, so you can offer an offline experience. And from then, you can do tons of things. There are APIs for not only letting your user use the web application offline, but if they make some destructive chains, like the typical example of a to-do list, like they add a couple items, you can save those and wait until you have a connection again to sync that data with your server. So basically what a native mobile app does is you get basically the same thing. And then on top of all that, with service workers, you also get notifications in supported platforms, which as of right now, it's mobile browsers. And I also think they're supporting some desktop browsers in some platforms. So that's another nice thing. And depending on the platform, they run on the background, because that's the other thing about service workers. They can act sort of like a daemon that is running on the background. So you can push notifications from your server and get them without the user having the website open, which is the whole point of notifications. I mean, if I'm already on the website, you can show me the notification inside the website. But the nice thing is that you can register the service worker, have it running in the background, and react basically to push notifications from the server. So you can show a notification to the user. You can even do some other things. There are some websites that are doing interesting things, like sending a push notification to the user. But what they do is, in the service worker, they do a network request to get the new assets. Because say you updated your website, well, instead of waiting for the user to visit it again to update the experience, you can preload that by sending a push notification, and then inside the service worker you can ask for those resources, and there will be in the cache already when the user goes back to your site. So that's actually been better than native apps, because you get like new versions without you doing anything, which is one of the strengths of the web, that there's no such thing as versioning. Whenever you open a website, it's there, it's new, it's the version that it is, that you don't have to update or do anything. So there are many things that you can do with service workers.
Really, really nice. Let's swap a little bit topic maybe, and let's move to command line tools in JavaScript. I know there are a lot of options there. Like, you can take the simplest path or the most complex path. What's your favorite?
I mean, if the people listening can get just one thing out of this episode, is to use this npm package called Inquirer if they are going to build a CLI tool, because there are no words to describe it. It's far from amazing. It's just fantastic. And if you've used basically any CLI tool for development, like Yarn or things like that, they all use Inquirer under the hood. So Inquirer, as the name might suggest, is an npm package that allows you to. It has a really, really, really nice API, like super well thought, that allows you to basically ask the user for things and get that input on the command line, and it gives you a ton of options, like so that the user can select multiple options from a list, or a single option, or it is a free form entry, and you have validation of the input. You can show errors. You can even do very complex things, like getting the list of options for a question, for example, asynchronously, doing a request. And the nice thing is that if you look at the API of Inquirer, a lot of the fields that you can configure accept promises. So what it does under the hood is it runs your promise and waits for it to resolve in order to show the options or whatever. So it's like really, really natural to work with asynchronous data. And you can just define the steps one after another. In one step, you can just add a key to tell it a condition. Like, if this expression is true, then skip the next step or not. Like, it's super powerful, but all that complexity, it's hidden away, basically. I just love it, in case it's not obvious by now. And there are a lot of complementary tools, but I think Inquirer is great in terms of, if you want that kind of flow, like asking your user questions and deciding what to do based on that. It's really nice. There's another popular package that is called Chalk. That is, you've all seen these CLI tools that have show like different colors on the screen, and Chalk is a very easy way to do that, because the problem with that is that depending on the operating system, the command line behind it, it's going to be different. So the codes are not exactly the same, and it's a pain in the ass, basically. So Chalk abstracts all that away from you, since you can focus on your CLI tool. So I think those two are among the most important ones. There are a lot of them. We can talk about them.
So I got recently bitten hard by Chalk
Mm-hmm.
updating the major. So there was a breaking change, and it broke half of my packages because I exactly relied on that API that they changed every single time, because I found it such a fantastic API, which was the advanced case with the constructor, and it broke all my packages. And well, it didn't break because I had to go there and then update it, but I wanted to be on the latest one, so I had to, because it's the new version 3 is actually way faster than version 2 for some reason. It was fantastic. So pretty nice. You almost use my the same stack that I use for building CLI tools. However, there are quite of other approaches that are pretty interesting. For example, Oakleaf. The tool built by a Roku, right? So have you tried it?
Yeah, I've tried it, but briefly, to be honest, because I was doing a talk on CLI tools, so I've used primarily Inquirer, but I wanted to see like what else was there to use. So I did some experiments with it. I think the main difference with the others is, from what I've seen, is like there's a divide in tools. Like there are two kinds of tools. On one side, you have things like Inquirer and Chalk that are like very specific. They're more like, I hate to talk about libraries versus frameworks, because I feel like it's semantics, and it's not really, the difference is not really clear. But if you more or less have that in mind, there's like Inquirer would be more like a library, and Oakleaf would be more like a framework. There's another one that is called, I think it's Glugon, that also has this kind of framework approach. So they give you a lot of things for you. Basically, some of them even packed one of these tools we've been talking about. So under the hood is the same packages, but you just get them wrapped in a single API. So I think it depends of, honestly, what you like more. Your style, I guess style is a weird word to use, but you know what I mean.
Well, there is also one major difference between these and the others, right? Like Oakleaf is really like does it best when it's when you code in TypeScript.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. That's another thing that you need to take into account when you're choosing an npm package, the TypeScript support. If you like that, that's something that I faced recently, mostly, and I was not so long ago. So now I'm facing that issue, that some libraries that we use at work or whatever, we're transitioning our code base to TypeScript, and then you find out that there's not either the library doesn't have TypeScript definitions, or there's not even type definitions available at all for the library, and it's a bummer, because then it's like you can write them yourself or switch libraries, and yeah, that's definitely something to take into account.
So bringing up TypeScript, I definitely kind of what is your, I mean, you said you've recently become a fan of it. I mean, I'm actually starting to become more of a fan of it myself. I generally dislike things that running transpiled code, but the JavaScript that TSC produces is actually really quite nice. So it's winning me over more and more. Kind of how did you come to the to the moment of starting to embrace TypeScript? And how often do you use it?
Well, we used Flow in my previous company. Not when I joined, but for the last maybe 4-5 months, something like that, we started using it. This was over a year ago. And so we were trying to decide between TypeScript and Flow. We ended up choosing Flow at that point because it was a React web application, and the integration with React was better in the case of Flow. Because we still, nowadays, Babel understands TypeScript and it can remove the types and everything. So the tooling involved it's not as hard as it used to be to use TypeScript inside a Webpack Babel project. And so I liked some things about Flow. I like a lot of things about there are some things that I liked about Flow that I don't like as much about TypeScript, but TypeScript is so clearly winning that at this point I just choose TypeScript. And the thing I like about it is that it gives me confidence, basically, in big projects. So, for example, one thing that I find it very useful for, besides your, would say, regular function, is it's very common that if you have an API and you're making requests, it seems reasonable to have some sort of model factory. So you basically get your response from the API and you transform it in some way to a JavaScript object that you end up using in your components or whatever it is, or your modules. So I think that's a very good use case for type system, whatever it is, Flow, TypeScript, doesn't matter, because that's actually modeling your domain. So it's a very good idea to have some type safety there, to have like all the objects in your model clearly defined. That makes it easier to work with them in your code. It saves a lot of it. First of all, it arises errors, bugs that you might have and didn't realize, because then now you think, oh, actually I'm taking for granted that this key is in this object, but actually it's not. Like, it could be null in the JSON that the API returns. That's very tricky to realize if you have a big JavaScript application and you don't have any kind of type checking. It will be a runtime error at some point, and that's when you will realize, but it's better you can catch that before in development. And then related to that, one thing that I also appreciate about it is that it actually saves you from writing some tests. I won't say all tests, because that's absolutely not the case. You still need to write tests. But, I think we've all seen these kind of tests that we write in utility functions that would you call the function with incorrect data? Maybe you call it with null or with an empty object, where the function, the thing that the function accepts actually is an array, for example. So if you have TypeScript and it's like an internal function, it's not going to be published as a package or anything. It's just part of your private application. You don't actually need to write those tests, because the type system is there for you. That you won't be allowed to do that. Your application won't build. So that's a nice thing, that you can save all that work and just have the type system prevent you. So I think those are the two main points that I like about it.
All the Java and C++ and type language developers they may be listening to this are probably laughing. Oh, you're realizing type safety is a thing.
Yeah.
No, it is good. Like I said, it's TypeScript is starting to win me over more and more, specifically for a lot of these issues. The developer experience when you're in an IDE.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The auto completion and everything. Yeah, that's incredible. That's like, I wouldn't go back. You get so used to that when you go back to a project. I think it's sort of the same thing that happened back in the day with ESLint and Prettier, that I think most of us take them for granted now. And when we go back to a project that don't have them, it's like, like, what the hell is this? Like, this is unbearable. Like, how did I even do things like this way? And it's, it's like 2 years ago, but you just get used to the good stuff, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't use Pretter. I ate it with all my bones. And
Really?
yeah, like it's and then I love ESLint though. Okay, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I don't use VS Code, so most of I'm still stuck probably in the 80s, whatever it is. And before I don't know. I entered Vim when I was a kid and never exited, and and I'm still doing that. I don't need all that fancy autocompletion. You might laugh, and James might laugh at me. I was even coding Java with Vim with very much pleasure, without
I mean,
any sort of autocompletion. There is a little bit of autocompletion in Vim in the sense that if you have opened the other file, it can autocomplete the methods. So it's actually pretty handy. So you mostly get a good experience.
It's funny. I mean, this is Mateo's kryptonite. If you give him a laptop that doesn't have Vim on it, he doesn't know what to do.
Literally, like I am, and all of those nice tools, and it's just mess with my head pretty much, very much. It's I can't, and my problem with Prettier, well, my problem is not with Prettier, is with Prettier VS Code extension, because once you enable it, it tries to prettify every single file.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And for a maintainer, every single PR of a Prettier user changes all the linting of all your files.
Yeah.
And it makes the PR impossible to review. And then I have to tell that everybody said, don't.
Yeah, that's actually a very valid concern. And I've actually heard people advocating for using Prettier, but not having the code editor integration, which, I mean, I like it, but I can perfectly see that case, that it can be a problem. It has happened to me sometime, that I've edited some file and then I see it and I'm like, why is this? Like, why is this formatted this way? And it's because I did it with VS Code or whatever. So, but again, you can always do that, like use it, but have it on a pre-commit hook so that it formats it once you are pushing it to the repo. So it gets it, like, I mean, it will format it if the repository has this hook and is configured to do that. But if the project doesn't use Prettier, it won't do that. So I feel like that's a reasonable option. But
that's
yeah,
how I configured it in the few projects that I have that are using Prettier. That's exactly how I configured.
Yeah.
I liked it very much in that way, to be honest. It's just the VS Code extension has caused so much frustration. Like I've maintained 400 something libraries on npm, so it's caused me so much frustration because it just changes everything, and people most not even realize. So.
Yeah, that actually illustrates very well something that sometimes we forget, is that a lot of our technical decisions are, we take decisions in a context, and that's extremely important. Like some some decision that a team makes, it's not good or bad. It's just a matter of their context, like the expertise of the team, the technologies they're familiar with, the stage of the project, if they are maintaining one product or 20 or an open source library or not. Like, all these things matter immensely in the tools that you end up using. So that's definitely true. And even with things like, I said before that I really like TypeScript, but it also has a learning curve, and it also is it is a pain in the ass sometimes, because it's not perfect, and sometimes it is wrong, and that's also that's actually a problem that type systems, static type checkers, as we have them in JavaScript. That's a problem they introduce, because sometimes it can be hard to tell if you are actually wrong and have a bug in your code, or if the static type checker is just not smart enough to get that, So sometimes you will add like a TS ignore, thinking that the TypeScript doesn't know what it's telling me, but he was actually right. or the other way around. So it has its drawbacks. It can make you slower at some points. So, but I think one thing I always have to think about that is that you can always use any. I mean, it's not ideal, but the way I think about it is, if I was not using TypeScript, everything will be any. So, it's not worse than what I had. It's just exactly what I had. So, I try not to do it, but sometimes it's like, I don't know, like we can move on and we can go back to revisit it later or something.
Well, I mean, yeah, it does all go, kind of speak towards that, developer experience. And I think we can all agree that the developer experience for JavaScript and TypeScript and server-side, client-side, all of this over the past few years has just gotten so much more complex. There's so many moving parts, so many APIs, so many different things to consider, that it really is difficult to do the right thing, or know what the right thing is, right? And so we just kind of, make do with what we have and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, and also like in terms of configuration, it really is a pain. Again, going back to context, if you are maintaining a single product, it's relatively fine. Like you do all the Webpack mambo jumbo once, and that's it. Just to have to maintain it, but oh well, it's more or less manageable. But if you are maintaining tons of npm packages, or like building new libraries all the time and publishing them to npm, you need to do that all the time. And that's why there are like a million starter packs out there. But everybody has their own opinion, so they're all different, and then you need to change this one little thing so it's not exactly what you want, and you need to fork it, and it's a mess. So it's great that we have tools like that, but there are two sides to it. They are awesome in one side, but then on the other hand, it can be a burden sometimes to deal with all that complexity.
It's been a fantastic conversation. Just to kind of start wrapping things up. One of the questions we like to ask our guests is, thinking like over the next year, right? What is one of your personal ambitions? Whether it's in tech, whether it's just, outside of tech, what's something that you're looking forward to or wanting to do?
Well, that's a very deep question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We only asked the simple questions.
Yeah. Wow. I think on the tech side, it's not much of a goal of myself in particular, but in general, related to what we've been talking about complexity of tools and everything. I think we're starting to see meta tools, so to speak, that hide away all that complexity, and I think that's a great thing. And I really hope that we see more of that. Like it's starting to be common that tools like ESLint that we were talking about before come with a CLI, that not only a CLI like to check your files, but a CLI to configure it. So it automatically detects where your files are, and it adds whatever it needs to be added to the package JSON. I think that's great, because it makes it easier to configure everything. So that's one more example, but then at the library sort of framework level, you have things like Next.js, for example, or even Create React App, but that's not as new. But Next.js is like a next, pun intended, I guess. It's like a next step on that, because it really does so much for you, and it's all abstracted away in this super nice way. So I hope to see that. And on the personal side, last year was I had given conference talks before, but last year I was very lucky to be accepted at a few of them internationally, mostly in Europe, but I was also in Russia and in Bangkok. So that was really nice. And, with the current situation, that's not going to be happening any soon. But it would be nice to see how this whole online conference thing works I think that's very interesting. I'm actually giving a talk in well, I don't know when this is going out, but in I think a couple of weeks or something. I'm giving an online talk, and I'm really looking forward to do more of that, because I think it enables people to go air quotes to conference that wouldn't go otherwise. So we keep talking about diversity and community and inclusion in our industry. Well, that I think that's a thing to get better at that, right? Because we can allow people that cannot afford a plane ticket or whatever to go to these conferences to participate. Because they can see the videos later, but it's not the same thing. This is actually, this is the conference. They are having the same experience as everybody else. And so the talking in the aisles thing, it's also happening in a chat. So, it's truly equal. It's not this see the videos later thing, which is not quite the same thing. So I'm excited about that, actually. I guess I'm choosing to look at the situation with a positive attitude. So I think that's something we could get out of it.
The current situation is hard for everyone, but I do think that there's going to be some very positive habit changes and different perspectives and stuff come out of it. So if we can level that playing field for more people and get more people involved and actively participating in real time around the world, I think that's just going to be better for everyone.
Yeah.
I do miss being able to fly out and hang out with Matteo there in Italy and everybody in Ireland and all over the place. But we'll get back to that point where we can fly around. But these online conferences are good stuff.
Also, let me add that it's because maybe I was focusing too much on the audience, but it's not only in terms of audience, but more importantly in terms of speakers. Because a lot of times conferences won't cover travel costs for whatever reason. Like there's debates about that. I won't get into that. But if it's an online thing, you can actually enable people to give talks that they wouldn't otherwise. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the time, Ramón.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic chat. For everyone else listening, don't forget to tune into our other episodes of OpenHive.JS and visit us at NearForm.com and stay connected. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
This has been another episode of OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript from NearForm. Join us next time for more insights and opinions from open source and JavaScript communities. Until then, I'm Matteo Collina. Thanks for listening.